B'siyata d'shmai, we're going to learn Yoma Daf Memvav. We're going to start 2 lines from the top of the Amud. And we're in the middle of the sugya we learnt on the previous daf that we saw in the Mishnah that there were 3 Tanoim. This is a Mishnah on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. At the end of the Mishnah we saw that in contrast to every other day of the year where there were only X amount of fires on top of the Mizbeach, on Yom Kippur there was one more. How many were there every other day? So we saw it was a 3-way machlekes. According to Rabbi Yehuda there were 2, according to Rabbi Yossi there were 3, according to Rabbi Meir there were 4. Everybody agrees that there were at least 2 every day. One was the Marocha Gedola, the big fire where all the korbanos were put. One was the Marocha Shnia Shel Kteres, where the coals for the daily Kteres were taken. According to Rabbi Yossi, there was an added one for Kiyum Ha'esh, maintenance of the fires, to make sure there was always one flame that was burning well on the Mizbeach. And according to Rabbi Meir, there was one more, and that was for the Ivarim and Pedorim, the limbs and fats that didn't make it on the Mizbeach the previous day or through the night, that they would be put onto this separate fire the next morning on the Mizbeach. So we're continuing now with Rabbi Meir. Omer Rabbi Elazar Mishum Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara said as follows: Omer Hoya Rabbi Meir. Bar Kapara assumed that Rabbi Meir held the following. 2 things. Number 1, Eivore Oilo Shenitoisru, those limbs of the carbon oilo of the previous day, the carbon tomichel ben arbaim of the previous day, that got left over, didn't make it to the Mizbeach overnight. They would make a separate fireplace for them on the Mizbeach, which is this 4th fireplace according to Rabbi Meir, and would arrange those limbs on that extra fireplace. Vafilu b'Shabbos, the second thing he said is that this is true even on Shabbos. If the carbon tomichel ben arbaim of Erev Shabbos didn't find its way on the Mizbeach on Erev Shabbos, and they got left till Shabbos morning. On Shabbos morning, they would put those limbs, those parts of the carbon tomichel ben arbaim of Erev Shabbos, they would put it onto this marocha, this 4th fire, according to Rabbi Meir. And we're going to now discuss each of these halachas separately. First, we're going to ask, Mai Kumash Malon, what was Bar Kapara coming to teach us by telling us that the Ivore Oilo Shenitoisru Oisolen Marocha B'fnei Atzma? Tanina, we already saw that in the Brisa and in the Mishnah on Daf Mem Gimel Mem Daled, that B'chol Yom Hoyu Shom Arba Marochis. Every day, the Rabbi Meir holds, every single day, there were 4 marochis, there were 4 fireplaces. One of them was for these limbs of the day before's karbonis could go on the next morning. So what are you, Bar Kapara, trying to impress on us with this first part of the halacha? Omer Rabbi Ovin, Lo nitzcha elo lepsulin. Rabbi Ovin said that there are certain types of limbs which are apostle, certain types of oila which are apostle, and nonetheless, im olu lo yerdu. If they find their way up on the Mizbeach, you do not need to remove them. So those limbs, once they are on top of the Mizbeach, that if they get left and didn't go onto the fire or get burnt properly on the fire overnight, they go onto this extra fireplace the next morning. But that's only, says Rabbi Ovin, if the fire had already started burning these limbs, and then the next morning, if they were not yet burnt, they would be removed from the fire because the big fire had to be rearranged for the next day's korbanos, and these limbs would be put onto that other place, that 4th fire, according to Rabbi Meir. However, if the fire had not yet started burning these limbs which were intrinsically posel, and the only reason we allow them to be burnt is because im olu lo yardu, but that's only on that day. But the following day, if the fire had not yet been burnt overnight at all, the fire has not yet burnt in any way overnight, then loi, we do not say this halacha, they do not get put onto this fireplace the next morning. That was one version of Rabbi Ovin. Ikad Amra, another version of Rabbi Ovin, to explain what Bar Kapara could have wanted to impress on us by telling us that the Ivore Oila Shenitoisru is echot ksherin ve'echot psulim, not only the limbs that were posel, even the limbs that are kosher. that what Bar Kapora is coming to tell us is that irrespective of whether they were kosher or not kosher, only once that the fire had already started burning them, then the next morning they could be finished being burnt on this separate marocha b'fnei atzmo. However, if the fire had not yet started burning them at all, loy, then we do not say this halacha. Rabbi Meir doesn't say this halacha, and they do not get put onto that special marocha b'fnei atzmo. And exactly what happens to those limbs that do not get put onto this marocha b'fnei atzmo, whether they don't get put anywhere on any fire, or if they get put onto the big fire, that's a discussion here in the Mefarshim. Continues the Gemara. What was the second point of what Bar Kapora said in the name of Rabbi Meir? That afilu b'Shabbos, that even the korban tomid shel beinu arbaim of erev Shabbos, if it didn't get burnt on the mizbeach from erev Shabbos and overnight, then on Shabbos morning they would be put on a marocha b'fnei atzmo. Asks the Gemara Tanina. We already learned v'hayoim chomesh. We saw in the Mishnah and in the Brisa that on Yom Kippur there were 5 fireplaces, the 4 of every day, plus the extra one for Yom Kippur. So you see that even Yom Kippur, that has the same halachas as Shabbos, the same malachas that are also on Shabbos, everything that's also on Shabbos is also on Yom Kippur. And nonetheless, on Yom Kippur, there were all 5 fires. One of them, according to Rabbi Meir, being this marocha b'fnei atzmo, that one would burn on them the leftovers of the previous day's korbanos. So you already see that even on Shabbos, you could burn the previous day's korban. So what are you, Bar Kapora, trying to impress on us? We know this halacha already. Omer v'acha b'Yaakov Yitzchok. No, Bar Kapora needs to tell us. There's an added element of chiddush here. Sal Kodaitich, I may have thought. If you learn the Mishnah and the Brisa at face value, then you'll assume that it's true that sometimes on Yom Kippur there's 5 marochis, there's 5 fires. When would you burn on Yom Kippur the korbanos of the previous day is if the previous day was Shabbos. And to burn the Shabbos korbanos, the korban tomid shel beinu arbaim of Shabbos, to burn it on Yom Kippur, that's okay. Because it's a Shabbos korban being burnt on Yom Kippur, which is also a type of a Shabbos. The chelvei Shabbos krevim b'yom kippurim. The fats of the Shabbos korbanos can be burnt on Yom Kippur. Aval be'emtza Shabbos, loy. I may have thought that if you have Yom Kippur in the middle of the week, it means that Yom Kippur is any other day other than Sunday, maybe you do not make the 5 marochis. Maybe you do not put the korbanos of erev Shabbos onto the fire on Shabbos morning. Kumash malon, that's what Bar Kapora is telling us in the name of Rabbi Meir, that no, afilu b'Shabbos, the Friday korbanos can be put onto the mizbeach even on Shabbos morning. Omar Rava asked, he wondered, Man hai, who is this person, Deloi chayish, who is not particular, lekomche, which is a type of a marshal, who's this person who's not particular in grinding his wheat to make sure that it's finely ground and that he's only grinding the kernels and not the chaff and all the part he doesn't want, that it should be a fine flour, not a coarse flour. It's as if you don't care. Ha b'chol yom Tanan, did you not learn in the Mishnah that every day there were 4? Which means even in the Mishnah itself, forget about Yom Kippur, the Mishnah itself says every single day, including Shabbos obviously, because Shabbos is also a day. Every day one would have 4 marochis, which means that it's clear in the Mishnah that even on Shabbos one would be able to offer up the korbanos of Friday. So then the question comes back, what's Bar Kapora trying to add to us? And the Gemara says, indeed, kasha. It's a kasha. Upliga de Rav Huna. Bar Kapora, who did say that even on Shabbos, that one would burn the korban tomid shel beinu arbaim of erev Shabbos would be burnt on Shabbos morning, that's arguing with Rav Huna. Because Rav Huna says that when the Mishnah says b'chol yoim, it means besides for Shabbos. And indeed, on Shabbos they would not put the korbanos of Friday, the korban tomid shel beinu arbaim of Friday would not be burnt on this marocha b'fnei atzmo on Shabbos morning. And the Omar, because of Huna held that tchilosoi doicha, that regarding Hilchos Shabbos, the tchilosoi, the beginning of the avodos of the korban tomid, which is the shlita of the Shabbos korban tomid, and the hakrova, putting onto the mizbeach the Shabbos korban tomid, that's doicha. that overrides Shabbos, and you can obviously bring the korban tamid of Shabbos. On Shabbos, we learnt about this in Masechet Pesachim. However, soifoi, if what's left over the end, which means that the Friday's korban tamid shel ben arbaim gets left over till Shabbos morning, einoi doicha. It does not get put on the Mizbeach on Shabbos morning. It doesn't override Shabbos. You're not allowed to put things on the Mizbeach on Shabbos unless it's a Shabbos korban. And not like Bar Kapara said in the name of Reb Meir. Rav Huna obviously argued in the name of Reb Meir, saying that Reb Meir only allowed to put the day before's korban onto the Marocha B'fnei Atzmo the next day, only if it's during the week, not on Shabbos. And this day it says that on Yom Kippur there were 5. It obviously means if Yom Kippur was after Shabbos, was on a Sunday, then the Shabbos korban was allowed to be burnt on Yom Kippur. But if it's a regular weekday, cannot be burnt on Shabbos or Yom Kippur. And now the Gemara is going to discuss Rav Huna a little bit more. Because Rav Huna actually just said, Tchilosoi doicha, soifoi einoi doicha. We assume that since the Gemara says, Opliga de Rav Huna, that Rav Huna is arguing on Bar Kapara, and Bar Kapara is talking about being Deicha Shabbos. So Rav Huna is also speaking about that Soifoi Einoi Deicha is talking about Einoi Deicha Shabbos. But we're about to see a Machlokas HaMiroim. Gufa Omer Rav Huna Tomid, regarding the korban Tomid Shel Beinu Arbaim of Erev Shabbos, or any korban Tomid for that matter. So Tchilosoi, the korban Tomid Shel Shabbos, that day's korban Tomid, the shlita and the hakrova Deicha. Soifoi, however, the korban tamid of Erev Shabbos, einoi doicha. It's not doicha. That means the soifoi means if what's left over from the Erev Shabbos korban tamid does not override Shabbos. These were the words that Rav Huna said. My einoi doicha. What does it mean, soifoi einoi doicha, that the leftovers of the korban tamid of Erev Shabbos do not override? What do they not override? Rav Chizda Omar, doicha es ha-Shabbos ve'einoi doicha es ha-Tumah. Not like we said before. Rav Chizda says that it does override Shabbos, and you're allowed to put the leftovers of the korban tamid shel Erev Shabbos onto the fire on Shabbos. What does it mean, soifoi einoi doicha? It means that it does not override Tumah. It means that if you've got a tumah, hutra b'tzibur, a type of korban, the korban tamid, in the event that it was allowed to be shechted, but tumah, one's allowed to do tchilosoi. You're allowed to shecht it, you're allowed to do the zrikas hadam, betumah. But you're not allowed to put the evorim onto the mizbeach, betumah, because the kapara is there, it can be done even without the evorim. We'll soon see. Verova, or others say Rabbi Omar, no. That doicha is a tumah, that soifoi is doicha tumah, that not only is the shlita and the akrova overrides tumah in those circumstances that one is allowed to override tumah, but even soifoi, putting the limbs, the parts onto the mizbeach, also override tumah. Ve'einoi doicha es ha-Shabbos, as we saw before, and there, this Rav Chizda and Rabbi are both arguing what Rav Huna meant, and Rabbi is the way we saw before, that according to Rav Huna, it's not doicha Shabbos. That means the shlita and hakrova of the Shabbos korban tamid overrides Shabbos, obviously. It's the Shabbos korban tamid. However, the Erev Shabbos korban tamid, which obviously the shlita was done on Erev Shabbos, and the zrikas hadam was done on Erev Shabbos, but soifai, putting the limbs back on the mizbeach, that you're not allowed to do, it does not override Shabbos. Omale Abaye le Rabbi. Abaye now questioned Rabbi and said, L'ditcho kashi, I've got a question against you. Uda Rav Chizda kashi, I've also got a question against Rav Chizda. Either way, I've got a question, because both of you agree that soifai only overrides either Shabbos or Tumah, but not both. And I've got a question. L'ditcho kashi, you Rabbi, I've got a question. Maish not Tumah. Why do you Rabbi say that soifai doicha es ha-Tumah? T'chsiv, because presumably, because it says in the pasuk, "Tzavas b'nei Yisrael v'amar talem es korban ilach mid ishareach nichoichi tishmru lahakriv li b'moy adoi." B'moy adoi means on its time, even b'tumah, afilu b'tumah. Shabbos nami b'moy adoi v'afilu b'Shabbos. We learned in Masechet Pesachim, Daf Zayin, at length, that from the word b'moy adoi we learn that a korban tzibur, we'll soon see exactly later on, but a korban overrides also Shabbos, also tumah. So why are you saying that only Tumah gets overridden Soifai and not Shabbos? And according to Rav Chisda, I've got the same question the other way around. Kashya. Maishno Shabbos. Why does Rav Chisda say that Soifai is Doicha Shabbos? T'chsiv, it says b'moyadoi, that you have to offer up the korban on time, afilu b'Shabbos. Even if it's on Shabbos, korban tomid overrides Shabbos. Tumah nami b'moyadoi v'afilu b'tumah. That the same b'moyadoi should tell us that it overrides Tumah. Omarle. So Rabbi said to Abaya, Ledidi Kashya, v'lo Rav Chisda Kashya. I'll explain to you, it's not a question, not against me, not against Rav Chisda. Ledidi loy Kashya, because what did Rabbi say? I said that Soifai is Doicha Tumah, it overrides Tumah, but it's not Doicha Shabbos, which means that you're allowed to put the limbs onto the Mizbeach, even though it's Tumah, but I'm not letting you put the limbs of Erev Shabbos Korban onto the Mizbeach on Shabbos. And it's not a question, even though it says B'moyadoi, and the same B'moyadoi overrides Shabbos as overrides Tumah. Why? Soifoi k'tchilosei, because it's the same halacha. The end of the Korban has the same status as the beginning of the Korban. So Tumah, as far as the Tumah is concerned, the tchilosei bar mitche Tumahu. Since we're talking about a korban that was allowed to be brought b'tumah, and the shlita was allowed to be done b'tumah, the zrikas adam was allowed to be b'tumah, the soifoi, putting the ivorim onto the mizbeach, is like the aschola, is doicha tumah. Soifoi nami dochi, and therefore you can put the limbs onto the mizbeach, nothing to do with Shabbos, even though it's tumah hutra b'tzibur. Regarding Shabbos, we're talking here about the Shabbos, putting the limbs of the korban tomid of Erev Shabbos onto the Mizbeach on Shabbos. You ask me a question, b'moyadoi, it should override Shabbos? Well, the putting the limbs onto the Mizbeach follows the beginning of the Avodah, which is the shlita, which was an Erev Shabbos. The tchilasoi, when it comes to the Tomid of Erev Shabbos, when would you do the shlita and the zrikas adam? Lav bar mitche Shabbos, so it doesn't override Shabbos. You cannot bring the korban Tomid shel bein arbaim of Erev Shabbos on Shabbos. No way. So the beginning of the avodah of this korban must be done not on Shabbos. Soifenami leidachi. So of course b'moyadoi is deicha Shabbos, but when is it deicha Shabbos? On the Shabbos korban, not on the Friday korban. Tumah, however, is doicha. If it is a korban which is doicha tumah, even that krovas evorim is doicha tumah. That's how Rabbi explained his own opinion. Rav Chisda lo kasha. Rabbi is saying, I'll tell you how to answer Rav Chisda as well. Soifoi k'tchilosi lesle. He argues with me. He doesn't say that the end, the krovas evorim, follows the status of the beginning of the avodah, which is the shchita. And therefore, as far as Shabbos is concerned, we know that korban tomid b'moyadoi even on Shabbos. It doesn't matter if it's the Shabbos korban or if it's the Friday's korban. Now you have ivorim, you have limbs of the korban tomid. Even if it's yesterday's korban tomid, Friday's korban tomid needs to go on the mizbeach. You can put it on the mizbeach because hutrahu b'tzibur. As far as Shabbos is concerned, or more accurately, as far as the korban tzibur is concerned, Shabbos doesn't exist. Soifenami dochi. Even if it's an Erev Shabbos korban, and the shlita and the zrikas adam had to be on Erev Shabbos, but soifei, as far as putting the limbs on the mizbeach, that's doicha Shabbos. Tumah, however, regarding Tumah, it's only dechuya b'tzibur. We don't say that as far as the korban tzibur is concerned, Tumah doesn't exist. No, it exists, and somehow we're forced to override it, but the Eved, it's a dichuy, it's not a heta. Since it's only dechuya, so here it's different. Tchilasei, the shchita and the zrikas adam, the ikar kapara, which is the main part of the atonement of the korban, comes from the shchita and the zrika. Dochi, it's doicha tumah. Soifoi, however, putting the ivorim onto the mizbeach, the lav ikar kapara, it's not the ikar kapara, no dochi, it does not override tumah. So we've explained all that. Itmar, says the Gemara, and this is a continuation of what we saw before in Daf Mem Hey, that they would remove coals from the big mizbeach, and in the mizbeach ha'ila, in the azara, they would remove coals or fire from there, also for the ketores of every day, also for the ketores on Yom Kippur, and also to light the menorah. Itmar hamechabe eish machta, and machta normally means the coals are going to be used for the ketores on Yom Kippur. Umenorah. So if somebody removed some of the coals to be used either for Yom Kippur, for the Ketores that was going to go in the Kodesh Kedoshim on Yom Kippur, or to light the menorah, and he extinguished part of that fire. Abaye Omar Chayev, because we know it says in the Pasuk, Eish Tomitukad ala Mizbeach lo yisirbe. Eish HaMizbeach, the fire of the Mizbeach, you're not allowed to extinguish it. Abaye says, if you took some of that fire for the sake of using it for the Ketores on Yom Kippur, or for the sake of lighting the menorah, and you extinguish it, Chayev, you're Chayev. Rava Omar Potter. Rava says, you're Potter. Now we're going to have two versions to explain this. The first version is as follows. Dekavya Baroishe shel Mizbeach, if you extinguished it at the top of the Mizbeach, you took a shovel full for the Ketores, or you took some fire for the menorah, and once you took it, you removed it from the main fire, and that whilst you're still at the top of the Mizbeach, you extinguished it, everyone agrees it's still called Eish HaMizbeach, and there's an issa of lo yisichbe, do not extinguish it. If you extinguish it, you're chayiv. Ki pligi, where are Abaye and Rava arguing? If you take it down to the floor of the Azara, and you extinguish it there. Abaye Omar Chayev. Abaye says this is fire from the Mizbeach, Eish HaMizbeach, and lo yisichbe, you're not allowed to extinguish it, even if it's not on the Mizbeach. Eish HaMizbeach, it's still considered Eish HaMizbeach, and he's chayev. Rava Omar, Rava says no. Rava says he's potter, given the notka. Since you removed it, you separated it from the Mizbeach, it's no longer on the Mizbeach, it's not called Eish HaMizbeach, and you're not chayev if you extinguish it. Says the Gemara, Elahad Omer of Nachman Omer Rabbi bar Avua. It was said in the name of Rabbi bar Avua, the Hamayrid Gacheles, it's explicit. If you take a coal, Me'al Gabe Mizbeach, he doesn't say why, just stam, for no reason. You take a coal from the top of the Mizbeach, you bring it down to the Azara, V'chibo, and you extinguish it, that you're chayev. Who's this following? We assume Kaman Ka'abayas, following Abaye, who says that it's called Eish HaMizbeach, even when it's not on top of the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, no. Afilatema Karava, it could even be according to Rava. Hossam, over there in that case of Rabbi bar Avua, why did he remove the Gacheles? Lo intek mitzvah, so he didn't separate it from the Mizbeach for a particular purpose of doing a mitzvah of either using it for the Ketores or to light the menorah. Therefore, it's still considered Eish HaMizbeach. However, Hocha, in the case that we're discussing here with Rava and Abaye, which is Mechabe Eish Machto Menorah, the reason he removed it was for a mitzvah. Hocha intikele mitzvah. So he removed it for the sake of doing the mitzvah. Once it's off the Mizbeach and you removed it because you had this purpose to do a mitzvah with it, it's no longer considered Eish HaMizbeach. And in that case, Rava says that it's not chayev. However, if you take it down for no reason, even Rava will agree it's called Eish HaMizbeach and it's chayev, like Rabbi bar Avua. Ikadomra, second version explaining Abaye and Rava. If you take the coals down, we're talking about you remove the coals for the sake of the machta, for the Ketores in the Kodesh Kedoshim, or for the menorah. If you take it down to the floor of the Azara, off the Mizbeach, the kavya, and you extinguish it there, everybody will agree, even Rava, even Abaye will agree that it's not considered Eish HaMizbeach. Kipligi, where they're arguing, the kavya baroishe shel Mizbeach. Oh, they're only arguing if you extinguished it at the top of the Mizbeach. Abaye Omar Chayev. Abaye says you're chayev. Eish HaMizbeach. It's considered Eish HaMizbeach. It's on top of the Mizbeach. Rava Omar Potter. Rava will say Potter. Why? Given the natka, since you removed it from the main fireplace, it's no longer considered the Eish HaMizbeach, and therefore you're Potter. Says the Gemara, El Had Omer of Nachman Omer Rabbi bar Avua. How are we going to understand Rabbi bar Avua, who said, Hamoirid Gacheles, if you take a coal from the top of the Mizbeach and you take it down Me'al Gaba Mizbeach v'kiba and you extinguish it, chayev, you're going to be chayev. Kaman loika Abaye v'loika Rava. We just said now that once you remove the coals from the Mizbeach to the floor of the Azara, everybody agrees that it's not considered Eish HaMizbeach. So who's Rabbi bar Avua following? Says the Gemara, no. Hossam, like we said before, lo intik mitzvah. Rabbi bar Avua removed the coal not for the sake of using it for a mitzvah. Therefore, even when you take it off the Mizbeach, it's still considered Eish HaMizbeach you'll be chayev, according to everybody. However, but in the case that we're discussing here, where you removed the coal for the sake of using it for the mitzvah of either the Ketores in the Kodesh Kedoshim or the Menorah in Tikla mitzvah, so, and there we said, even though it's still at the top of the Mizbeach, Abaye will say it's still considered Eish HaMizbeach, and Rava will say that is potter because it's not anymore Eish HaMizbeach. However, if you remove it for no reason, it's still called Eish HaMizbeach, even when you take it down, both according to Abaye and according to Rava. Hadron Aloch Toref Bakalpi. Baruch Hashem, we finished the fourth parak of Yoma, and Mirz Hashem we'll do Chazor of the fourth parak in Yoma, and in Mirz Hashem in the next Shiur we're going to start the next parak, Parak Hoitziulei.